The 2018 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, brought to you from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. This is the race for Secretary of State.
Welcome. I am Claire Sims, a multimedia journalist for Fox 5 Atlanta. You are watching the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta. This is the debate among candidates for Secretary of State. First, let's meet the candidates. They are, in alphabetical order, John Barrow, a Democrat who served as Georgia's 12th District Representative in the U.S. Congress from 2005 to 2015. He then taught classes at the University of Georgia. Smythe Duval, the Libertarian candidate, is a veteran, a registered nurse, and works in the medical IT field. And finally, Brad Raffensperger is the Republican candidate. He is CEO and owner of Tendon Systems, LLC, which is a specialty contracting and engineering design firm. Now, let's meet our panelists. Tom Baxter covers politics in the South for Supporter Report, and Veronica Waters is an anchor and reporter with WSB Radio. Now, let's get started. For rules on today's debate, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website at atlantapressclub.org. All right, so to start the debate, each candidate will be asked one question by one of our panelists. Tom Baxter, you get the first question to Brad Raffensperger.
Mr. Raffensperger, during Brian Kemp's tenure as Secretary of State, the Secretary of State's office has given up control of the Dentistry Board, the Pharmacy Board, Medical Composite Board, and the Nurses Board has waged a protracted battle to get out from under the office. Has this diminished the power of the Secretary of State's office, and what's the problem? Why do these boards want to leave the Secretary of State's office?
Well, thank you for the question. I can't really speak about the past. I look about the future, and I've heard from the nurses. I've met with many different boards. I'm the only business person in this race, and I'm actually a structural engineer licensed by the state of Georgia and also a licensed general contractor. And those two boards have been very pleased with my service. But if there are any boards that need attention, need fixing, need some modifications either legislatively or administratively, that's that'll be my first focus this coming session as we work through any changes that we need to do. I've heard from the nurses, and I know that we do need to make some changes. And
do you want to keep them under?
I believe that I would definitely want to keep them, because to me, if I don't keep them, I want to give it my best shot. I'm a business owner, and one of the things I do every day, really as an engineer and as a business owner, is solve problems. And that's what I intend to do, is solve the problems, hear what people are. There's over 140 or 130 different boards, 40 different licenses. I want to make sure we fix them.
All right, thank you very much. Veronica Waters, you may now ask Smythe Duval a question.
Mr. Duval, does the Secretary of State have a moral imperative to make sure that as many citizens as possible, regardless of demographic or party, are registered and able to vote?
Thank you for the question. So, yes, the quick answer is yes. So we have a constitutional right to participate in representative democracy in this country, and it is absolute travesty if you use any kind of bureaucratic measures or any other kinds of ways to prevent people from voting. One of the things that I am most alarmed by is the number of precincts that have been closing across the state of Georgia. It is something that we need to take seriously. One of the things that I am advocating for is what's known as same-day voter registration. Same-day voter registration, not only would it create more accurate rolls because you can do it more in real time, but it would also be a hedge against abusive partisan mischief. Same-day voter registration is enacted in 16 other states, and I believe it would benefit us to bring it here in the state of Georgia.
Thank you very much. Tom Baxter, you now can ask the question of Mr. Barrow.
Mr. Barrow, federal judge Amy Totenberg ruled against a motion to force the use of paper ballots in this fall's election. But she said state election officials had buried their heads in the sand about weaknesses in the state's voting system, and she said it was likely the plaintiffs would eventually win their case. So what immediate changes must the next Secretary of State make to address this problem?
Well, first off, the judge is absolutely right. The current administration in the General Assembly and the Secretary of State's office has drug its feet for a long time, has had its head buried in the sand about the issue. The standard under Georgia law is not whether you can prove an election machine has been hacked, but can you prove that it can be hacked? And that's been demonstrated to the satisfaction of the judge and the press repeatedly. One of the first things I would do as Secretary of State would be to convene the proceeding outlined in Georgia law to decertify these machines because they no longer meet the statutory standard laid out by the folks who bought these machines back in 2002. And this is very much in keeping with an issue that was addressed in the first question, because this is something that you can address to the people in the last 4 years. And Mr. Raffensperger has been in the General Assembly for the last 4 years, and it's been his responsibility to exercise oversight over the Secretary of State's office. There's been a failure of leadership on both ends of that street to make sure that the voters in Georgia cast ballots that are counted exactly the way they cast them.
All right, thank you, Mr. Barrow. Mr. Raffensperger, because you were mentioned in that last answer, I'd like to give you a moment to respond.
Well, as I've campaigned the last year, what I've been telling everyone is we need to update the voting machines. If for no other reason, they were put into service in 2002, so they're 16 years old. So we need to update it. And I said that we need something with a verifiable paper audit trail. And as related to in the General Assembly for oversight, I introduced and we passed a bill that allowed business owners to renew their corporation for up to 3 years as part of my push for deregulating and reducing regulations on our businesses and small business owners.
All right, thank you very much. That concludes the first portion of our debate. The candidates will now ask a question to one of their opponents. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and then 30 seconds for a rebuttal. By random selection, John Barrow, you may ask the first question to one of your opponents.
Thank you. Brad, you're a successful guy. You're worth $30-something million. And yet since 2005, you've been delinquent on property taxes in Gwinnett and Muskogee counties. Now, this was actually made an issue in your campaign for City Council in 2011, your campaign for State House of Representatives in 2015, and again in your campaign for Secretary of State this year, and yet you didn't pay your delinquent property taxes until this year. Can you please tell us the reason why you didn't pay your taxes until this year?
Well, we do over $30 million a year, and each year we pay over $1 million of taxes in all the different states we work in. We work in over 30 to 35 different states. And like I said back in the spring, if there's something that we missed, we would be happy to take care of it, and we did.
Mr. Barrow, you get 30 seconds.
We both know the real reason, because this was made an issue in 2011 and in 2015 and again in 2018. The real reason is because there's a technicality in the law that allows you to pay your taxes late, even if you qualified as a tax delinquent, if it was not determined in a court of law. The only reason you paid it this year is because your opponent this year, David Belle, filed a complaint that was going to get you knocked off the ballot. Now, what you've done is you've taken something that was designed to protect the innocent from innocent mistakes and turned it into a safe harbor for deadbeats, even rich deadbeats. If that ain't disqualifying, it ought to be.
Thank you both. Mr. Raffensperger, it's your turn to ask a question of one of your opponents.
To Mr. Barrow, you were quoted in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution this year saying that you would not keep the voter registration list clean by removing inactive voters from the voter rolls. Do you still stand by your position to allow dirty, inaccurate voting registration list?
Brad, you ought to know if you read the article that that is a complete misrepresentation of what I said. In fact, I'm quoted in that very article as saying, of course we have to update our voting rolls to make sure that people who have moved, who have died, are kept off the rolls. But I also pointed out that there are more reliable ways of doing that than a postcard purge program that has an unreliability rate of upwards of 30%. I support updating the voting rolls and have taken that position over and over again. I support using the Social Security records of people who've died, death certificates, the U.S. Postal Service reports of folks who've moved. Those things are much more reliable than a postcard purge where you know the results you're going to get back are upwards of 30% wrong. It is easier to register to vote today than it's ever been in the past, provided you have the right kind of ID. But it's also easier to get bumped from the rolls than it is to lose your water service at home. And that's not right. I think the ability to vote is a whole lot more important than the ability to flush your toilet in an apartment, and yet you're pursuing voter purge methods that actually are so unreliable that they degrade the voting rolls rather than update them.
You have a rebuttal?
People like John Barrow are why we need photo ID.
Thank you both.
Another thing that I support.
All right, Mr. Duval, it is your turn to ask a question of one of your opponents.
All right, so Mr. Raffensperger, you have mentioned in previous debates that you are for purchasing electronic ballot markers to be used as Georgia's new voting system. And purchasing 30,000 of these is going to cost Georgia voters over an extra $100 million, or triple the cost of a hand-marked paper ballot and a scanning machine, the type of configuration used in 70% of the other states. How can you claim to be a conservative while justifying such extravagant expense?
Well, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we protect the vote, that there's an integrity of the voting process. The Safe Commission right now is looking at several different platforms, and there's 5 to 6 different platforms out there. Some of those are 100% paper, some of those are electronic with paper marking, and there's other means. What I said, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that it's safe and secure and that we have a verifiable paper audit trail. What comes out of the General Assembly will hopefully allow us to put that out to bid, and so we'll have new voting machines up to date, ready to go for next fall of 2019, so that we're ready for the 2020 elections.
Mr. Duval, you have a rebuttal.
So I'm the only candidate up here that has IT management experience as well as cybersecurity management experience. I've also done my homework by attending these SAFE committee meetings. His solution would cost over $140 million, and it's less security. I propose that we do a hand-marked paper ballot, and I am the fiscal conservative in this race.
Thank you. That concludes the second round of our debate. For those just joining us, this is the debate between candidates for Secretary of State. Now we will go into the panel to ask questions of the candidate of his or her choice until we run out of time. And as a point of moderator privilege, I may also ask questions of the candidates, and I will determine when a rebuttal is appropriate. So we are going to start now with Veronica, whoever you'd like to ask of a question.
Thanks, Claire. This is for Mr. Barrow. Georgia is one of the 5 most vulnerable states when it comes to election security. I want to ask you directly, what do you propose to turn that around, and just how important is a verifiable paper backup?
I think it's essential to have a paper backup, but I wouldn't call it a backup. I'd call it a primary voting system. What we need is a system where the voter can actually look at the ballot before they cast it and determine that that's actually the ballot they want to cast. And then you put it into a scanner, if appropriate, to make sure that you're not making some obvious mistake that you can fix before it's cast into the box. And then you have a ballot that can be read by the voter, counted afterwards, and recounted if necessary. I would follow the procedure that's already in Georgia law right now to decertify these machines, not because they ain't good enough for government work. That's just it. They're only good enough for government work. They're not good enough for elections, because they can be hacked. This has been proven to the satisfaction of the public reading the press and the court that's supervising this case. What we need is to decertify these machines and move to the process that's currently allowed by state law, which is hand-marked paper ballots using optical scanners to improve the voting process for the voter and the counting process at the end, but never, never to substitute and do away with a vote that can be read and counted.
Thank you. Tom Baxter, it is your turn to ask a question.
Mr. Duval, I thought I saw your ears perk up a moment ago when we were talking about the boards, and the various medically related boards and their relationship to the Secretary of State's office. What do you think is the problem? Why do so many of these boards, like the nurses, want to leave the Secretary of State's office? And is it a good idea?
I would think that it's a problem of frustration. It's a service problem. The Secretary of State, like many of Georgia's, different departments, they had to cut back during the Great Recession. They cut the funding, and that funding has not kept up with growth. And I believe it's probably more than anything, there's a real funding issue in the Secretary of State's office, and that funding issue is playing out in different ways. And that includes we're not providing adequate service to these boards. There's a statistic that is taking upwards of 400 and some days for things to get resolved at the nursing board, and that's indicative. What we need is to get a funding formula that provides the service that we need, that provides the service to not only these boards but to anybody that's applying for a business license or a professional license. If we're going to make this Georgia the best state to do business in the country, then we need to have the services that live up to that.
Thank you. Mr. Raffensperger, part of your platform has been about reducing human trafficking
Yes.
as part of the Secretary of State's office. How is that something that you think falls under the purview of Secretary of State?
I was just really stating my value that I believe that if there's people that are using our corporations to work and have illicit activities going on, then we don't need to be condoning that in Georgia, and we just revoke their charter.
Thank you. Veronica, it's your turn.
For Mr. Raffensperger, we have seen that a cyber researcher was pretty casually able to download the voter information for almost 7 million Georgia voters, got to see passwords for how election workers would be able to sign into servers on Election Day, all through a very casual sort of hack of the Center for Election Systems at Kennesaw State. So I have a two-pronged question. How satisfied and confident are you that when voters go to the polls this fall, that no matter for whom they vote, their votes will be counted? And how would you, as Secretary of State, ensure going forward that Georgia's election systems can't be compromised by Russian hackers or anybody, including the ones that we know who have targeted at least 2 metro Atlanta counties?
Well, I'm confident that the elections this fall will be safe. But to your larger issue about really cybersecurity, that is a major issue. If you look at one of the largest national credit reporting agencies, they were hacked. Just this past week, Facebook said they were hacked. And so I believe that the confidential voter information needs to be secured. One of the things that we have to do is encrypt Social Security numbers, but I really think your Social Security number should be moved separate in another database. And then what is actually in the database that's available to more people would actually be your unique identifier, your Georgia identification number, which is rich. If you open up and look at your voter ID card, it's right there. So that would be part of it. But we should encrypt all the numbers. Social Security numbers have been encrypted, only the last 4 show. But that is a concern that I have, and it really gets down to so much of it. Yes, there's a technology component, but another part of that is training and communicating, training and communicating. That's what great corporations do every day, and as a business owner, that's what I'm going to do, working with our folks.
Thank you. Tom?
Mr. Barrow, I'm going to follow with a similar question. Do you believe the Russians or any other any other foreign government have an interest in interfering in this year's elections in Georgia? And what do you think should be done to guard against that in the future?
Of course they have an interest in doing that. That is the position of the current administration in Washington. That's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to screw around with elections any way they can to sow dissatisfaction and distrust and dismay in our politics. And of course we can do something about it. It is unacceptable for someone who's been a part of the General Assembly for 4 years to say, I think we ought to do something about this after the next election, when it should have been their job to make sure we were doing something about this since 2016, when it became apparent that outsiders were trying to interfere in our elections. And again, you don't have to believe that the election's been stolen or fixed to realize it's being messed around with. And if you believe it's being messed around with, you have a reason to doubt the results. That's all our enemies need to do, whether our enemies are in Moscow or whether or not it's some 400-pound guy on his bed in New Jersey. It don't really matter. We should have a system that follows Georgia law as it's written right now. When these machines have been found to be hackable, you decertify them and go to the default option of paper ballots with optical scanners. So we get a good unofficial count, but we have something that we can really count.
Thank you. Mr. Raffensperger, since you were referenced in Mr. Barrow's answer, we'll give you some time to respond.
Well, I think I really made my point earlier, and that we need to update the voting machines. And what I talked about, the system that used in Conyers, looked like the DRE machines we have today, but then the ballot was printed out, and then you ran it through an optical scanner. And that seems to be the secure technology, and that's what a lot of states are using. So I think we need to look at what other states are using, and then really pick the best process, the most current process that makes sense for Georgia.
Thank you. Mr. Duval, one of your pegs of your platform is ranked choice voting. Do you think that's something that voters here in Georgia, obviously you think it's something they should have, but do you think that's a system we could implement here?
Yes, ranked choice voting is a no-brainer for Georgia, and I can tell you why. First thing, it's becoming popular. It has been passed statewide in Maine. 18 different cities across the United States are using it. In the state of Georgia, what it would do is increase political competition, and it would also save a ton of tax money. In ranked choice voting, the voters get to choose their candidate by putting a 1 next to their favorite candidate, a 2 next to their next favorite, and so on and so forth. And by doing that, they have provided all the information necessary that would be used in a separate runoff. That's going to save Georgia counties millions of dollars, but it's also going to allow voters, which they love, to be able to choose their most favorite candidate without having any kind of strategy of who might win or who might not win. They can vote their conscience. Ranked choice voting bring that to Georgia. We increase political competition. We save tax money. It serves our military. It is a no-brainer solution for the state of Georgia.
Thank you. Veronica?
This could be sort of an offshoot of ranked choice voting, and if it's possible, I'd like to get all three candidates to sort of weigh in. Should the Secretary of State's race even be a partisan race to begin with?
Mr. Barrow, let's start with you.
I don't think there's any question that this is the office that most folks think of as being a nonpartisan office, as being an office that shouldn't be partisan. In fact, one of the things that I think that qualifies for me for this job is that I have the most bipartisan record of anybody up here who's running for this office. I found a way to work with folks on both sides of the aisle on the most controversial and contentious issues in the most partisan legislature in the country, more often than anybody else has. This is an office that has a lot of administrative and ministerial responsibilities. It's really a constituent services agency for the business community. At least that's its day in and day out job. And it also presides over elections every couple of years, which is important to all of us in a nonpartisan fashion. So I think the office ought to be filled on a nonpartisan basis, but it shouldn't be nominally nonpartisan, where a vacancy can be filled by a partisan appointee. It should be like the U.S. House of Representatives, where the only person who gets appointed to this office is someone who's elected to this office by the voters. That's the only way to make sure that it will be nonpartisan, not only when the person's chosen, but throughout the process as well.
Mr. Duval.
So that is a great question, and there's no doubt when you have someone that's officiating an election, especially in this hyper-partisan environment, having a nonpartisan, an independent, someone who does not have a dog in the fight is absolutely most important. And one of the things that it takes away from our election system is that you see that the Secretary of State has become partisanized since the Bush versus Gore in 2000, and that's truly unfortunate. You know, I am an independent, I am a libertarian, I am radically independent of both the Democrat and the Republican Party. I don't owe their leadership anything. Their lobbyists don't have any strings on me at all. All right, I am not using this office as a stepping stone to higher office. I am committed to, fixing Georgia's broken election system. I'm bringing skills to do that, and I'm doing it in such a way that I represent all Georgians. Doesn't matter their political affiliation. Doesn't matter, what they believe. I represent all Georgians in the American way that we're supposed to have representational government.
Thank you. Mr. Raffensperger.
I think your question really cuts both ways, and I would say on balance, I think I would keep it as it is. And the reason is that if you have a governor, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, they're going to pick a Secretary of State if it's a selected position, it's a nonpartisan position. They're going to pick someone from their own party. So as soon as they do that, it in effect becomes a partisan position. But by having a Secretary of State elected, it means that you're holding your Secretary of State accountable to the voters. And the more you can hold people, elected public servants, accountable to the voters, I think it's better for our republic, because politicians need to be held accountable for whatever they do. And I think that's why I keep the system as it is. But thank you for your question.
Thank you. That is all the time we have for questions. Each candidate will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. Brad Raffensperger, you get the first closing statement.
There are major differences between myself and my opponent. I'm running for Secretary of State to make sure that only Americans vote in our elections, make sure that Georgia is a great place to find a job and to build a business. I will safeguard voter integrity by making sure we keep photo ID and making sure that we update our voter rolls. I think we all know folks that have been victims recently of identity theft. And by keeping the voter rolls updated, we can help safeguard and keep our elections clean so we know the person that won actually did win. I'm the only business owner in this race that has run an office the size of the Secretary of State's office. I'm ready to run on day one to fix the things that need to be fixed, improve the things that need to be improved, and make the changes that need to be changed. I'm running to make sure that only Americans vote in our elections and to make sure that Georgia is a great place to find a job and a great place to build a business. I'm Brad Raffensperger, and I'm asking for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Smythe Duval.
So my name is Smythe Duval. I am a citizen, not a career politician, and I'm not using this office as a stepping stone to higher office. I want this job, and not only that, I want to fix Georgia's broken election system. I am sick and tired of the partisanship between the Democrat and Republican Party. Neither party seems capable or willing to address the nation's most pressing problems. By contrast, the Libertarian Party of Georgia is reaching out to independent-minded voters, and we are pursuing competitive, fair, and secure elections. As an election reform candidate, I'm offering Georgians a chance for genuine change. Vote for me, and you will get the attention of the General Assembly. Put me in office, and you'll get the attention of the entire nation. On November 6th, vote Smythe Duval, Georgia Secretary of State.
Thank you. John Barrow.
Well, thank you. I'm running for Secretary of State in order to make it easy for the business community, especially the small business community, to create new jobs. I'm also running to fix what's broke with our election system so that it's easy for citizens to vote and impossible to cheat. And I'm also running to bring a little balance back into our state government. On that last issue, I have found that everywhere I have gone in the state, the two things that come up more often than anything else are the need for accountability from our elected officials. Folks all over the state are tired of folks saying one thing and doing another. They're tired of voting for things that voters have to choose from that they can't understand. They're tired of folks not paying their taxes until they're forced to do it, even when they can afford to do it. They want some accountability from our elected officials. They also want someone who's capable of working with folks on both sides of the aisle. And I have a demonstrated ability to do that. If you want a Secretary of State who'll do the job the way it's supposed to be and who cares about the job, wants to do the job the way it's supposed to do, and who'll bring some accountability back to the office, then I ask for your vote, and I'd be proud to have your support.
Thank you. That concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that Election Day is Tuesday, November 6th, and early voting begins October 15th. Our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of journalists. I would also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club and Georgia Public Broadcasting for arranging today's debate. For more information on the full schedule of general election debates, please visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be archived there and on Georgia Public Broadcasting's website, gpb.org. I'm Claire Sims. Thank you so much for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series.